Tonight on PBS News Weekend, an exclusive frontline interview with Iran's top nuclear negotiator as global sanctions over its nuclear program are set to resume. Then, as more women are choosing to have children later in life, we explore the skyrocketing demand for freezing eggs. And the iconic Rose Garden gets a new look as part of a series of changes at the White House.
The White House history is living history, and certainly so much of American history takes place there, can be told through the prism of White House history, but it evolves and it changes.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by...
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
The ongoing support of these individuals and institutions.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS News Weekend. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
And Friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. Iran is bracing for global sanctions over its nuclear program to go back in place. The measures threaten to cripple Iran's economy. Their currency is at a record low, and ordinary Iranians are struggling to get the food they need to survive. The UN Security Council rejected a last-ditch effort to delay the sanctions after negotiations with European nations failed to reach a deal. Barring some sort of last-minute diplomatic breakthrough, the renewed sanctions will freeze Iranian assets abroad, penalize any development of Iran's ballistic missile program, and ban the sale or transfer of conventional weapons. Frontline correspondent Sebastian Walker conducted an exclusive interview earlier this week with Ali Larijani, head of Iran's Supreme National Security Council. Seb, he previewed for you Iran's reaction to these sanctions going back in place. Let's listen to what he had to say.
اول مسئله اسنپبک باید حل بشه تا بعد به این سوال شما پاسخ بدید.
It's conditional.
خب بعد وقتی که اونا اینطور در مقابل ما بایستن و به زور بخوان یه قطعنامه‌های علیه ما انجام بدن، ما دلیلی نمی‌بینیم که با آژانس رابطه متعارفی داشته باشیم.
Tell us more. Who is Ali Larijani and why is this so significant?
So he is the secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council. Now, this is the body that essentially has the say over foreign policy decisions, head of the security apparatus, and also strategy over the nuclear program. So essentially, he's the chief negotiator. What he says is extremely significant. This is a very rare conversation. This is the first time that he has spoken to foreign media since his appointment. It's also the first interview that he's given since the 12-day conflict with the US and Israel. And the timing of this, just in the lead up to everything that we've heard at the UN and this deadline for the sanctions to come back, made this a very, very interesting conversation to have.
You also asked him to react to the US claims that attack by the United States and Israel obliterated their nuclear program.
President Trump has said that the enrichment facilities targeted were completely and totally obliterated. Is he right?
از خودشون بپرسیدشون اعلام کردم که خلبانای ما خیلی رشید بودن، شجاع بودن، اومدن بمباران کردن و موفق بودن. دیگه حرف ایشونو نادیده نگیرین.
What's your assessment of the extent to which these sites have been damaged and how much this has set back Iran's nuclear program?
ارزیابی خیلی دقیقی ندارم تو این زمینه، ولی به نظر من هیچ وقت برنامه هسته ایران رو نمیتونن از بین ببرن. چون وقتی شما صاحب یک تکنولوژی شدید اینا نمیتونن از بین ببرن. این مثل این که شما مخترع دستگاهی باشید، این دستگاه رو از شما بدزدن، شما باز میتونید بسازید.
What was your takeaway from that answer?
Well, this is obviously at the heart of what's going on with this question over whether UN inspectors should be allowed back in or not. Iran wants to preserve as much mystery as they can about the extent of the damage. This is what everyone wants to know. Did these strikes succeed in degrading Iran's enrichment facilities? Were the US strikes on Natanz, Fordo, Esfahan sufficient enough to set back the program? We asked for access to these facilities. We were pushing as hard as we possibly could on the ground to get any filming done of any of the strikes where the US missiles hit. We were told that was impossible, and you heard from Mr. Larijani there that they don't think that the bombed sites should be open to UN inspectors. This is something that he said really is conditional on the sanctions not being reimposed. He was saying essentially if these sanctions come back, then they will end their participation with the IAEA. And you're seeing signs of that already. Iran has recalled its ambassadors from Germany, France, the UK for consultations. He warned about the consequences of these actions and that Iran could withdraw from these negotiations as a result. So, we pushed him on, a number of questions that I think international observers have about the impact of these attacks. We asked him, where is Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium, more than 400 kilos of HEU that Iran says is buried under rubble. International observers want to know where that is, and we asked him for information about that. None was forthcoming. So again, the takeaway overall is that Iran really is trying to kind of preserve whatever mystery it can about the extent of the damage. That's one of the few tools that they really have left after this devastating war that's taken place.
And you also asked him about the possibility of more U.S. attacks.
What's your message to the Trump administration if there are more attacks? What will be the consequences of that?
پیامی ما به دولت ترامپ نداریم، فقط میگیم که مراقب حرف زدنتون باشید که نسبت به ملت ایران توهین‌آمیز حرف نزنید. وقتی ایشون میگه ایران باید تسلیم بشود، مثل که ملت ایران رو نمیشناسه.
Do you get the sense that they're worried about more attacks either from the United States or from Israel?
I think there's definitely a worry about that. The attacks, we were able to travel around the country to places that were targeted. We didn't see the US strike sites, but we were able to visit locations where Israel had eliminated some of Iran's leading nuclear scientists, places in Tehran that had been bombed, apartment buildings. There's a real apprehension on the part of Iranians that we met that more strikes could be coming down the road. There was, alarm about how much had happened during this war. The 12-day conflict really showed Iran's weaknesses to a lot of ordinary people, that these scientists could be eliminated so effectively. And I think spending time in the country, while we weren't able to really have a kind of truly authentic engagement with Iranians that we met. You're very highly monitored, controlled everywhere you go. It's very challenging as a reporter to report from Iran. But there is a sense that these strikes have really kind of had a huge impact. The Iranian currency is at a record low. The news of the sanctions coming back, I think, is incredibly worrying for a lot of ordinary Iranians. And it's just something that I think is, we're really now at a point where anything could happen next. The sanctions coming back in puts Iran into a place where the engagement with the international community is now unclear. You heard from Mr. Larijani there saying that they are going to withdraw from participation with the IAEA. And I think that begs the question, what are going to be the consequences of that? What are the US and Israel going to do next?
Frontline correspondent Sebastian Walker, thank you very much. Sebastian's exclusive interview will be part of an upcoming documentary for PBS's Frontline in collaboration with The Washington Post. In tonight's other headlines, President Trump says he's sending troops to Portland to protect it from what he called domestic terrorists. In a social media post, the president said the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem requested the forces. Mr. Trump said he's giving the military authority to use full force if necessary to protect Oregon's war-ravaged largest city. Demonstrations at Portland's ICE facility have become frequent, some of them escalating to violence. President Trump is asking the Supreme Court to uphold the restrictions he wants to impose on birthright citizenship. The administration says that lower court decisions blocking the executive order the president signed on the first day of his second term are undermining our border security and confers the privilege of American citizenship on hundreds of thousands of unqualified people. If the court does take the case, arguments probably wouldn't take place until late winter or early spring. Palestinians fleeing Gaza City are trying to figure out where it's safe for them to go. Nearly 60 people died overnight. Medical staff who set up tents to receive the dead and wounded say some were killed by airstrikes and others were shot. The IDF said it was not aware of anyone killed by gunfire in southern Gaza. The strikes came a day after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's fiery speech at the United Nations, in which he said Israel must finish the job against Hamas. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, the increasing popularity of egg freezing as a way for women to delay starting a family. And the iconic White House Rose Garden gets a makeover.
This is PBS News Weekend from the David M. Rubenstein studio at WETA in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
More people than ever are putting their hopes for parenthood on ice, literally. They're freezing their eggs, removing some of them from their ovaries and storing them for the future. Often they're doing this well before they intend to start a family. It's a costly procedure that had primarily been used by people undergoing medical treatments like chemotherapy that could affect their fertility. But now it's becoming more common among healthy women. We asked people taking this step to explain why.
I'm Yolanda. I'm a professor in Illinois, and I froze my eggs at 36.
My name's Caitlin. I'm 28, and I'm currently planning on doing egg freezing.
I knew I wasn't ready to have kids at that moment, but I wanted to preserve some chance of having a biological child in the future.
I want to just be able to live my life and not feel like I'm on somebody else's clock. Or I guess technically my own clock, right?
So my life since I've frozen my eggs, I've gotten a promotion. I've traveled to Paris, Antigua. I'm going to Mexico soon. I got my maternity leave in my contract. It just freed some things for me.
Especially in your 20s, for me anyways, like I'm still exploring and figuring out who I am as a person, right? I really don't know. And I don't want to saddle myself with such a big decision like having kids when I don't even know who I am and what I'm doing with my life.
I think that I can bring so much more to being a parent because I've taken that time to discover who I am, and I feel like I'm a much more mature, patient person than I was earlier in life.
Society puts a lot of pressure on women to especially find a partner, to have kids, to do all of these things. And there's really no right age to have kids. There's no right age to get married. And I think doing something like this for myself kind of normalizes that, but also gives me that freedom and opportunity.
To learn more about why egg freezing is becoming increasingly common and what it can and cannot promise, Ali Rogan spoke with fertility specialist Dr. Lucky Sekhon, author of The Lucky Egg, Understanding Your Fertility and How to Get Pregnant, and journalist Natalie Lampert, who wrote The Big Freeze, a reporter's personal journey into the world of egg freezing and the quest to control our fertility.
Thank you both so much for being here. Lucky, let's start with you. What is egg freezing and why do people do it?
It's basically a method that is used to try and get around the biological clock and preserve one's fertility for the future. And what you're essentially doing is the first part of IVF. It involves two steps: stimulating the ovaries to try to get multiple eggs to mature. And then the second part of the process is called an egg retrieval. We're extracting the eggs and then we look at them under the microscope, and any of the eggs that are mature, we know could one day be possibly fertilized by sperm successfully. So those are the ones that are frozen. And then those eggs can remain frozen indefinitely. They don't change or degrade over time. And if someone runs into fertility issues later in life, they can utilize those healthier eggs that will have a better chance at turning into healthy embryos.
And Lucky, is there an ideal age at which people should consider freezing their eggs? And also, what are you seeing in terms of the demographics with people that are coming to you for this?
The simple answer is the younger, the better, right? Whenever we crunch the numbers and look at the data, the two most important variables that predict success are how many eggs are frozen and at what age it was done. But truth be told, we see great outcomes even when patients are doing this in their very early 30s, because it's still kind of a subtle shift that's happening in their biological clock at that point. In terms of changing demographic, we've seen a massive reduction in the mean age of the typical patient coming in to freeze their eggs. It used to be mostly women in their late 30s. And now we're seeing a lot of people do this more proactively. I'm seeing a lot more patients in their late 20s and early 30s. And along with that, those patients, when they are coming back years later to use their eggs, we are seeing improvements in outcomes because we're seeing lots more eggs being frozen and a better conversion rate when we go to turn those eggs into embryos.
And Natalie, from your perspective, how popular has egg freezing become, and what do we know about why?
So initially, egg freezing was done only out of medical necessity, mostly cancer patients who froze eggs before undergoing chemotherapy, which can leave a woman sterile. But egg freezing very quickly moved beyond doing it for medical reasons. In 2009, 482 healthy women in the US froze their eggs. And in 2022, nearly 23,000 did, which is something like a 4,000% increase in just over a decade. So a few things contributed to this. First, in 2012, the American Society of Reproductive Medicine removed the experimental label from egg freezing. And then in 2014, Apple and Facebook announced that they would cover the cost of egg freezing for female employees, like thousands and thousands of dollars per person. So that kicked off a huge increase in companies offering a whole range of fertility benefits, including egg freezing. And there's also now much more coverage from insurance companies. So those major developments really contributed to egg freezing skyrocketing.
And Natalie, you've spoken with many patients who have done this. What's prompting them to go down this path?
What I found while reporting my book was consistent with what the research shows, which is that the vast majority of women freeze eggs because they haven't found the right partner, the person that they want to have children with. Now, I do want to say that I'm talking mostly about heterosexual women here, and it's important to mention that, for example, women in same-sex relationships rely on egg freezing to have biological children. And so the motivations are certainly different for LGBTQ plus people or solo parents by choice, et cetera.
And Lucky, egg freezing is far from a guarantee. How much should patients be banking on this procedure working?
I always emphasize that egg freezing is never a guarantee of future fertility. What you're doing is you're freezing potential. It's not an insurance policy. It's not a sure thing, because human reproduction is inefficient. And when you go through the process of extracting those eggs and freezing them, you're freezing potential, and that inefficiency doesn't magically go away. You're still working with a bunch of eggs, which we look at as long shots. You have to eventually, if you want to come back and use them, thaw them. You will lose some eggs at that step. And then maybe 70 to 80% may fertilize. And again, this can vary from case to case. And the biggest drop off is only about half of those fertilized eggs will turn into an embryo. So you really have to start out with a lot more eggs than people often will assume. And we usually talk to patients to emphasize this point by saying, it's like a 10-to-1 ratio from eggs to live birth. But obviously that ratio is going to vary depending on factors like age and your egg quality.
And Natalie, what do we know about how this affects people once they've gone through it?
So for many women, freezing their eggs sparks a very positive and powerful psychological shift. The research is very clear on this. And what they feel is powerful relief. They feel less dating pressure, more career focus, and really a break from the constant tick-tock of their ovaries. What I find even more fascinating is that most egg freezers say that the price tag, it's very expensive, and the intense side effects are worth that peace of mind, even if they never end up using their frozen eggs, which is incredibly powerful.
There's a lot on social media that is targeting young women who might be considering doing this. What are some of the pitfalls that you've observed in terms of the efforts to kind of advertise this service to women?
I'll start by saying the most important thing to remember if freezing eggs is that egg freezing is a backup option. It offers some assurance, but it is not insurance. And that is a very important distinction. And so what I say to women who are considering freezing is, one, choose a reputable clinic, one that's been doing egg freezing and IVF for a long time. Don't go to the shiny new clinic across from your office or the chain of clinics that you always see advertised on social media. Because Ali, to your point, the marketing is quite aggressive. Those are the two most important things to keep in mind.
Natalie Lampert and Dr. Lucky Sekhon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
In his second term, President Trump is putting his mark on the White House, making changes to the building and its grounds. Just this week, he unveiled the Presidential Walk of Fame along the West Wing colonnade. It features portraits of each of the previous commanders-in-chief, except for one. In place of President Biden's portrait is a photo of an Otto pen signing his name. Elsewhere, work has begun on a grand ballroom, and even the iconic Rose Garden has gotten a new look. Ali Rogan is back with that story.
I am officially declaring a national emergency.
It's hosted addresses to the nation in uncertain times, bill signings.
Family and medical leave is a matter of pure common sense.
Weddings, and this month, another history-making moment.
This is the Rose Garden. We never touched a rose. The roses are in full bloom.
A garden of roses by the same name and smelling just as sweet, but with many changes. There's new patio furniture and umbrellas with bright yellow accents, resembling President Trump's club in Florida, Mar-a-Lago. There's a newly laid slab of concrete, and for the People's House, some members-only flair.
You know, you're the first ones on this great place. We call it the Rose Garden Club. And it's a club for senators, for congresspeople, and for people in Washington.
The president said the changes would make space more accessible and easier to navigate. Mr. Trump announced the new Rose Garden Club during a dinner of about 100 people, a mostly partisan crowd made up of Republican lawmakers and top White House staffers. But after the unveiling, public opinion was divided, some headlines calling it tacky, focusing on the stark paving job. Some historians take a longer view.
The White House history is living history, and certainly so much of American history takes place there, can be told through the prism of White House history, but it evolves and it changes.
Stuart McLaurin is the president of the White House Historical Association, a nonprofit organization founded to help preserve the executive mansion and its contents, as well as educate the public about its history.
We forget that this is a house to the president and his family. It's an office to the president and his staff. It's a ceremonial stage upon which we welcome our most important visitors from around the world. It's also a museum that about 500,000 people a year have the privilege of going through. Imagine all of that happening in your home.
In fact, once upon a time, the Rose Garden was just a garden, growing produce for the White House kitchen and acting as a pasture for dairy cows and sheep.
Mr. Kennedy taking the oath administered by the Chief Justice.
Gerald Kennedy, solemnly swear.
It wasn't until 1961 when the Kennedy family moved in and took on the task of restoring and modernizing the White House that the garden took on a more official role. President Kennedy envisioned the space as an extension of the White House, one where he could address a crowd or entertain guests. But those changes also came with their share of public commentary.
President Kennedy was concerned that there would be press criticism or this money is being spent. What will people think? And there were articles in the newspaper about what is Mrs. Kennedy doing to the White House. There were concerns raised when she did her Rose Garden renovation in the 1960s as well.
That renovation ended abruptly with Kennedy's assassination in 1963, but subsequent presidents and first ladies took up the mantle.
There have been presidents since John and Abigail Adams that have lived in this House. They've been of all political persuasions, conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, and yet the House has emerged and sustained to be the great house of the American presidency, and it will continue to be that for generations to come.
Their surroundings may change, but the White House roses bear witness to it all. For PBS News Weekend, I'm Allie Rogan.
Now online, the many ways Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s vaccine policy changes have critics on high alert about the effectiveness and safety of vaccines. All that and more is on our website, pbs.org/newshour. And that is PBS News Weekend for this Saturday. I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.